you've been in this role for a number of months, and you didn't parachute into this role just like that. You have had experience in a number of institutions, entities, agencies, but this is a completely different ball game. What were the challenges that you faced as soon as you landed in this important role?
I think there were a number of challenges. Number one is that the regulatory landscape, which oversees the financial services sector in Europe and outside of it, has changed dramatically. Since the financial crisis in 2008-2009, the way banks are managed, supervised, has changed dramatically. You had the new fourth anti-money laundering directive, which came into effect, and there's also now another directive, the fifth money laundering directive, which will be coming on stream, and many other directives, MiFID II, and other directives which came into force over these years. So, of course, the regulatory environment now is more complex, so there is more stress and demands on regulators like the MFSA, but also on banks and other financial institutions. Apart from that, when I joined the MFSA, I found out that the MFSA has been, obviously, not found out, I mean, it was there for 25 years, since 1994, when it took on the role of being the single supervisor. However, there was the need for, I would say, MFSA version 2. In the sense that there are a number of reforms that we needed to do internally. We have a current situation also where we need to increase our capacity, we need to upskill our people for the next generation of regulation. So that obviously presented a number of challenges whereby you have a large sector which you need to supervise. You need to keep the risk for the jurisdiction at the lowest level possible. But at the same time, you have a regulatory environment which has changed dramatically.
If you had to see where this industry is growing, you've mentioned already a number of things that have happened because of geopolitical decisions.
Yes.
Brexit is one of them. But if you had to go beyond this, blockchain is another, you mentioned it. If you had to look into the future, where are you seeing growth for the MFSA in terms of operational growth that would increase the number of customers and clients?
I think I would see it in all areas. Insurance is one of them. Fund management is another. Banks is an area where we can, and for example, banks for me is an area which I'm giving a lot of attention to, because Malta, in my opinion, Malta is underbanked. It needs more banks to service the industry, because all the load of this economic activity is going on a few banks.
And how would Joe Kushkiri and the MFSA proceed to indicate to this important sector that we are here and you could have a base in the Maltese territory?
I think at the end of the day is whoever is coming to invest in Malta looks at the legislation, looks at the way the regulator works, how approachable is the regulator, and investors like to know that what you see is what you get. The ecosystem, the infrastructure, the IT connectivity, all these, it is not just what the MFSA does, but it's what we do as a the holistic package. Because ultimately the MFSA is the Maltese jurisdiction at the end of the day is a financial services center. But I believe that with the improvements we are making, we're going to prove to the world that the MFSA is as good as its peers in Europe. We are not there yet, but we are improving. One is to keep in mind that Malta is a small country. Our resources are limited. We don't have the resources which much bigger countries have, or the experience as much as other countries have. But there is the commitment, there is the will, there is the drive to really do the necessary investment so that the MFSA becomes an efficient regulator, and at the same time also can take enforcement action and can take it quickly. But then on a jurisdictional level, I think if we improve, as a jurisdiction, improve our infrastructure, do the necessary reforms also in our legislation. For example, even the legislation which regulates the MFSA needs to be tweaked, and that is an area which we'll be looking at in the future. I think if we carry on doing these things, I really think that Malta has a bright future in the sector.
As most banks will tell you in Malta, they have a low risk appetite.
Yes.
And that obviously puts them in a situation that doesn't quite tally with the financial services environment of a small territory like Malta.
Yes, that's true. The banks right now have a low risk, yet the banking sector in Malta keeps growing. And one has to keep in mind that when it comes to the KPIs of banks, banks in Malta are very robust. In fact, the fact that our banks have been risk averse over many, many years, banks are well capitalized. They meet all their liquidity requirements. In fact, it was one of the reasons which kept us away from trouble when we had the financial crisis. Keep in mind that there were other jurisdictions, governments, who had to put in money into banks to keep the banking system.
What is the solution then?
Now, what we need to do is this. Number one, we need more competition. Because in reality, in Malta, we have 25 banks licensed by the MFSA. But in reality, we have 6 who are really servicing the economy. The others are banks who are international banks, so to speak. They're
very niche-oriented.
Very niche-oriented. They're not really doing any retail activity in Malta servicing the local community, or at least they just do some really limited corporate banking, for example. Now, what we need to do is we need to have more banks. What I would like to see from banks is more innovation, for example, more innovation in technology, more innovation in terms of providing services to clients online. And the only way to unlock that innovation and perhaps also have the ability to service the industries where the economy is going is to have other niche banks who are coming on stream with, for example, digital platforms, technological platforms to serve the new economy. For example, the areas of blockchain, for example, these new technologies of artificial intelligence. And
which in themselves are new, which in themselves require an understanding of the fact that they, most of the time, do not have a history. So there is an element of risk comes naturally.
So just to be clear, I don't blame the banks for taking a risk averse, because no bank wants to have any reputational damage in this day and age, particularly with the way now the European Central Bank obviously is supervising banks across the SSM countries. So I'm in no position to tell, listen, you have to lower your risk appetite and you need to accept that type of business or the other type of business, because that I have no right to do it, because I myself am, as the regulator, insisting with banks that they need to have proper governance controls, proper financial crime controls and other controls that they need to have in place. But I think one needs to avoid, for example, the one size fits all. You cannot apply the same level of, and most of the complaints I hear is either you do not get a license. You could have a license holder just getting a license from the MFSA but not managing to open a bank account. So these are all, or huge delays, months, sometimes 6 months to open a bank account. So to conclude on this point, I think there needs to be more innovation, and I think the way banks onboard customers have to be more sophisticated so that they really take a risk-based approach, not rather putting everyone in the same page.
A very simplistic question about this particular point. If there was an element of trust between the established traditional banks and the MFSA with regards to the due diligence and supervisory protocol, to the extent that it is so robust, that the banks would basically take it for granted that the company that has basically been licensed is a bona fide company that can proceed with banking services and etc., etc. Don't you think that there should be a point in the future when this would happen, that there would be this element of trust, that once some entity passes through the due diligence process, the protocols that are in place, which have been strengthened, then it follows suit that banks should take this as a green card for offering certain services?
I would say yes. I mean, but I don't think that the banks are taking this approach because they do not trust the MFSA. But I think but in reality, banks, even if we had the most foolproof, 100% watertight system, banks would still need to do their own checks. So it would be difficult for them, probability. I mean, I never worked in a bank and I'm not a banker, but I wouldn't assume that they say, okay, no, if it's licensed by the MFSA, then there are no problems, or the risk is zero. I think they still would need to. But I think that if we strengthen and we show that we have strengthened our first line of defense, I think, yes, that could perhaps help the situation.